She was invisible until one bold move changed everything. For 3 years, Emily Parker showed up at 7:02 a.m. sharp every day, rain or shine. She brewed the coffee, sorted the papers, kept her head down. Not one person in that glass office tower ever asked about the degrees she never used or the grief she quietly carried. She was a widow, a single mom, once a promising finance graduate, now reduced to just the secretary, until the day her millionaire boss humiliated her in front of an entire boardroom, and she had to decide, stay silent and survive, or speak up and risk everything. What would you do if the world had already decided who you are and you knew they were wrong? This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about reclaiming worth, about the quiet strength that lives in ordinary women, and the courage it takes to be seen. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or unheard, this story is for you. Leave a comment if it touched you. Your support helps us tell more stories that matter. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales that speak straight to the heart. Now, let's begin with the woman nobody noticed. For 3 years, Emily Parker walked into Whitmore Development at exactly 7:02 at that. And for 3 years, no one, not even her boss, ever called her by her name. She knew every square inch of that lobby, the cool marble floor that clicked beneath her sensible heels, the front desk receptionist who never looked up from her phone, the elevator that hesitated slightly between the 3rd and 4th floors, like it, too, was tired of going unnoticed. Emily didn't expect anyone to notice. That was the quiet deal she'd made with the world after her husband died. She would keep moving, keep working, keep mothering, and in return, life would let her be invisible. At 36, Emily wore her grief like she wore her cardigan, soft, familiar, always there, but no longer something she talked about. After losing Chris to a drunk driver on a foggy November night, she had packed up her teaching career and her toddler son and moved back to Massachusetts, where her sister lived. She needed stability, something predictable, something that didn't ask her to feel too much. Whitmore Development gave her that, or at least it paid the bills. She applied for the position of executive assistant not because she loved spreadsheets or corporate calendars, but because it came with health insurance and a paycheck that covered her rent in Cambridge and her son's after-school care. The job required her to manage the calendar of Grant Whitmore, founder and CEO, a man whose reputation preceded him like a winter storm warning. He was brilliant, exacting, and, as she quickly learned, emotionally impermeable. She remembered her first day how Grant had glanced at her resume and said, without looking up, "Don't talk unless it's necessary. I don't need cheerleading, I need efficiency." So, she gave him efficiency. Emily was always early, always prepared, always composed. She learned his preferences, memorized his travel schedule, and became so seamless at anticipating his needs that he didn't even have to ask. He rarely did, anyway. Most of their communication happened through post-it notes, shared documents, and short, clipped phrases like reschedule Miller or wrong font. He never called her Emily, just you or her or the assistant. She didn't complain. There was no time for that between school lunches, mortgage payments, and bedtime math problems. At home, she was mom. At work, she was invisible. And yet, she noticed everything. She noticed the way the office shifted when Grant walked in, the way conversations stopped mid-sentence, and laughter folded into awkward silence. She noticed how no one decorated their desks, not even at Christmas, how the junior associates rarely stayed past 6 months, how fear, not inspiration, ran this company, and she noticed, with a quiet ache, how deeply lonely it all felt. The morning of the incident started like any other. The sun hadn't fully risen when Emily arrived, thermos of coffee in hand, and logged into her computer. She reviewed the briefing packet for the 9 a.m. development meeting, including the zoning reports, legal advisories, and a set of community impact statements that she'd compiled the week before data Grant hadn't asked for, but that she knew he'd need. At 9:03 a.m., the meeting began. 12 men in tailored suits and one woman seated slightly back from the table, listened as Grant outlined the proposal for a new luxury complex in South Boston. His tone was clipped, his presentation polished. But Emily's heart sank as he clicked through slide after slide, quoting statistics that were, at best, outdated. There it was. The zoning issue she had flagged 2 weeks ago. It was still unresolved, and no one else seemed to notice. She cleared her throat gently. Not loud, just enough. Grant didn't even turn his head. "You have something to add," he said sharply, eyes still on the screen. Emily hesitated, then said, "There was a revision to the zoning proposal last week. It affects." "That's not your concern," he interrupted, finally looking at her. His eyes were ice blue, unreadable. "You're not here to interpret legal reports. You're here to schedule meetings. Let the professionals handle the rest." The room was silent. Emily felt heat rising in her chest, but she swallowed it. She looked down, folded her hands in her lap, and nodded. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore." He continued as though she hadn't spoken. The meeting ended, the suits filed out. Grant disappeared into his office without another glance. Emily sat alone in the empty conference room, blinking at the screen where his mistake still glowed in bold Helvetica. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just sat there. Then she stood, walked quietly back to her desk, and opened her email. There, in her sent folder, was the zoning update report she had sent him on Monday. Subject line, "Urgent revised zoning impact on South Boston site." Status, unread. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then, with a soft sigh, she closed the laptop, leaned back in her chair, and whispered to no one at all invisible. Again. Just because they didn't ask, didn't mean she didn't know. Emily Parker sat alone at her modest desk, tucked into the far corner of the executive floor, where the plants were always fake and the windows didn't open. Her nameplate had long since lost its shine, the plastic letters dulled by dust and neglect. But the mind behind that nameplate, sharp, disciplined, quietly burning, had never dulled. It had simply waited. Long before she wore the title secretary, Emily had been someone else entirely. A scholarship student at Dartmouth, a double major in finance and education. She had once been offered a junior analyst position at a national bank in Chicago. She remembered holding that offer letter in her hand the same week Chris had proposed. Back then, she believed in plans, in timing, in the kind of life that unfolded in tidy bullet points and weekend getaways. She gave up the analyst job to stay in Boston with Chris, and traded hedge fund models for high school lesson plans. She taught economics to restless teenagers who never understood why she loved teaching them about compound interest or market psychology. Then came the crash, the one that wasn't on any chart, a late-night call from the state police, a highway slick with rain, a Ford truck that ran a red light. And just like that, the life she'd built, every plan, every spreadsheet, every shared dream was gone. Chris was gone. In the months that followed, Emily went from widow to mother in survival mode. She moved closer to her sister, found a job that didn't require emotional investment, and told herself she was doing the right thing for Jake. The numbers made sense, but her soul hadn't caught up. Still, habits die hard. She never lost the part of herself that researched everything. That verified, triple-checked, color-coded, which is why, when she overheard Grant mentioning the upcoming pitch to Svensson Partners, the Swedish firm interested in Whitmore's new waterfront development, her instincts kicked in. Something about the project had seemed off. The land acquisition was rushed. The environmental impact reports were vague. And the zoning board had made a quiet amendment last month that hadn't hit the broader media cycle yet, but Emily had seen it buried in the public records archive while preparing weekly summaries. She didn't wait to be asked. Over the next few evenings after Jake had gone to bed and the house had gone still, she dove in. She pulled up the updated ordinances, cross-referenced the building codes, and flagged a dozen potential issues, including one that could void the entire permit process if not addressed. She stayed up late printing and annotating every page, Her eyes stung, her neck ached, but it felt good. Like remembering a version of herself she hadn't touched in years. By Monday morning, a full binder sat on her desk, tabbed in blue and yellow, with a note clipped to the front, R.E. South Boston Project, Zoning and Legal Risks. She dropped it in Grant's inbox at 7:05 A. By 9:00 A. It was still sitting there, unopened, by 11:00 A. Grant was in the glass-walled conference room on the 12th floor, presenting to 4 sharply dressed representatives from Svensson Partners, along with his executive team. Emily stood in the back, as she always did, not invited, but not told to leave. Her fingers fidgeted with the corner of her notepad. She watched as Grant clicked through his slides, confident, smooth, utterly wrong. He cited land use regulations that had changed 2 weeks ago. He promised construction timelines that violated the updated environmental review period. He assured the investors that Whitmore Development had 0 zoning obstacles when she knew, for a fact, that one particular clause, if enforced, could stall the project for 6 months. Her heartbeat thundered. She picked up the binder she had brought with her, her backup copy, and took a small step forward. Then another. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice quiet but clear. He didn't even turn. "Not now." I said, "not now." "Emily." The last word was sharp. It echoed. A few heads turned. Her cheeks flushed. She stood there for another beat, binder in hand, heart pounding like it wanted out. Then she stepped back, slowly, carefully. The meeting ended 20 minutes later with polite applause and a round of handshakes. The Svensson team looked intrigued, if a little reserved. They left with folders of glossy mock-ups and promises of swift follow-up. The room emptied. Emily remained. She walked quietly to the head of the table where Grant had stood. His coffee cup still steamed. His laptop sat open, presentation slides frozen mid-graph. And on the edge of the table, just barely tucked under his notes, was her binder unopened, still pristine. She reached for it, but then stopped. Her fingers hovered above the cover. She didn't take it back. She didn't move. Her gaze drifted across the polished wood of the table, the empty leather chairs, the cold city skyline beyond the glass. And then she whispered, not with anger, not with despair, but with something quieter, something heavier. "If no one will listen, maybe it's time they have no choice." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't scream. She just walked across the room and poured the truth all over his expensive presentation. It began with silence, the kind that fills a room right before something shifts. Not thunder, not chaos, just the stillness of a moment too long ignored. Emily Parker sat at the far end of the conference table, as she always did, her notepad resting on her lap, more for habit than utility. Around her, executives buzzed like well-dressed bees, nodding at the right places, murmuring in agreement at the right buzzwords. The room had that sterile kind of tension that came from people pretending to listen while calculating what time they could sneak out for lunch. Grant Whitmore stood confidently at the head of the table, flipping through his printed packet for the South Boston proposal. He was in his element crisp suit, no tie, sleeves rolled up just enough to say he was both powerful and relatable. His voice filled the room, measured and polished, cutting through the air like a blade. Emily, for her part, felt her hands go cold. Her gaze flicked to the 4th page of the proposal. There it was again, the zoning clause. Wrong, completely wrong. She'd flagged it, highlighted it, sent him not 1 but 2 emails with attachments. She'd printed the report, annotated the margins, and even left a copy on his desk with a handwritten note clipped to the top. "Please review. Urgent update. Nothing." And now he was quoting outdated information to a room full of decision-makers as if it were gospel. She watched as a junior project manager, a nervous young man with shaking hands, tried to speak up. Grant shut him down with a single sentence. "I think we've already covered that." The man shrank into his seat. Emily closed her notepad. 3 years, 3 years of silence, of showing up early, staying late, knowing her place, waiting her turn, and for what? To be talked over, looked through her chest, tightened. Her throat burned, but not with tears, with clarity. She reached for her coffee, barely warm now, and stood. No one noticed, not until she stepped forward, walking the full length of the room with even steps, her heels muffled against the carpet. A few heads turned. Grant paused mid-sentence, thrown off by the movement. "Miss Parker," he said, tone clipped. "If there's a scheduling issue, let's handle it later." Emily didn't stop walking. When she reached the head of the table, she paused just long enough to meet his eyes. Then, with quiet precision, she tilted the cup. A ribbon of brown liquid cascaded down the glossy pages of the proposal. It spread in branching stains, soaking graphs and projections and promises alike. Gasps ricocheted through the room. Someone dropped a pen. Grant stared at the wreckage. Emily stood tall, shoulders back, voice steady. "This," she said, her hand gesturing to the sodden document, "is what it feels like to watch your work be dismissed. No one moved. I spent nights researching the legal changes to that zoning law. I flagged the amendment before your legal team even saw it. I gave it to you. You didn't read it." Grant's jaw tightened. "Emily," she didn't let him finish. "I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm not here to start a scene. But I've been in this building 3 years, and I'm tired of being invisible." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "I'm tired of doing work behind the scenes only for it to be overlooked or claimed by someone else. I'm tired of being treated like a background fixture. I'm not your shadow. I'm not your assistant. I'm someone who knows what she's doing." Across the table, eyes widened, some in shock, some in recognition. She continued, softer now. "You don't have to respect me, but you will stop pretending I'm not here." Silence fell again, heavier than before. Emily placed the empty coffee cup on the edge of the table. The gesture was almost gentle. Then she turned and walked back to her seat. Each step was deliberate. Her heart was pounding, but her hands didn't shake. She sat, folded her hands in her lap, and looked forward. Grant remained where he was, staring down at the ruined proposal. His fingers slowly gathered the pages into a pile, though the ink was already running, the numbers bleeding together. He looked up at her, not with anger, not with indignation, with something else, maybe curiosity. He turned to the others. "That's enough for today." Chairs scraped, murmurs began, but no one dared speak directly to Emily as they filed out. Some gave her wide eyes, a few discreet nods. When the last door closed, Emily remained seated, back straight. Grant stood alone at the front of the room. He didn't speak immediately. Then, quietly, almost as if the words surprised him, he said, "I didn't expect that from you, Miss Parker." Instead of firing her, he offered her a seat at the table for 10 days. Emily sat across from Grant Whitmore in his glass-walled office, the echo of her actions still humming in the walls like a song no one dared replay. The coffee-stained contract was gone. Someone had quietly replaced it with a fresh copy during the night, but the memory lingered intact, undeniable. No one had spoken to her directly after the incident, not even Lauren, who usually couldn't resist a whispered judgment by the copy machine. Now it was just the two of them. The room was silent, except for the ticking of a minimalist clock on the wall and the faint sounds of Boston traffic rising from the streets below. The morning light cut across the sleek desk between them, and Emily could see tiny flecks of dust dancing in the beam, like ash suspended midair. Grant leaned back in his chair, hands steepled, studying her with a focus that felt different. Not like a man evaluating damage control. Not like a CEO about to issue a termination. Like a man reconsidering everything he thought he knew. "I should have fired you," he said at last. His voice measured. "That's what the rulebook says." Emily didn't blink. "Then why didn't you?" A beat of silence. Then, "Because I think you might be the only person in this building who actually told me the truth." He stood, walked over to the window, hands in his pockets. "I've built this company from the ground up. 52 buildings, 12 cities. Not because I'm soft, not because I let people challenge me in meetings. He turned back, but yesterday, when you poured coffee on $500,000 worth of planning, I realized something. I've never had a partner in this office, only employees, and employees are afraid to tell you when you're wrong. Emily's pulse quickened. She didn't speak. He walked back to his desk and opened a drawer, pulled out a plain manila folder and slid it toward her. 10 days, he said. You sit in on every meeting, you work directly with me, no titles, no boundaries, just you, your brain, and whatever it is you've been hiding behind post-it notes and polite silence. She hesitated. And after 10 days, if it works, he said, we renegotiate your role, your pay, your title, everything, and if it doesn't, you walk. With a recommendation letter that opens any door you want. Emily looked down at the folder. Her name wasn't on it, just the number 10, 10 days. 10 days to prove that she was more than a name no one remembered, more than a polite nod in meetings, more than the woman with a good memory and a quiet tone. She sat very still for a moment, the weight of it all settling into her bones. What if this is just your way of punishing me? She asked softly. Grant's gaze didn't waver. I don't waste time on punishment. I'm offering an opportunity. Whether you see it as a trap or a door is entirely up to you. There was no smile, no warmth, but there was something in his voice, a flicker of curiosity. Emily exhaled. Her mind raced. She thought about Jake, about rent, about how long she'd been putting herself on hold just to make things work. Then, slowly, she reached for the folder and nodded. I'll do it. Grant didn't react. He simply checked his watch. Then I'll see you tomorrow. Don't be late. She stood. I never am. As she reached the door, he called out, Miss Parker? She turned. I meant what I said. I didn't expect that from you. Emily gave a half smile, small and tired. Neither did I. She hardly slept that night. Instead, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, thoughts whirling like its blades. Could she do this? Not the work that she didn't doubt, but the visibility, the pressure, the constant proximity to a man who'd once overlooked her and was now watching her like a puzzle he wasn't sure how to solve. By morning, she'd talked herself in and out of the decision 3 times. But at 5:20 a.m., she was already dressed in slate gray slacks and a navy blouse that made her feel quietly powerful. She packed a small notebook, 2 pens, and Jake's lunch for school. He shuffled into the kitchen, still in pajamas. Big day, he mumbled around a mouthful of cereal. The biggest. She smiled, leaning down to kiss his hair. At 5:58 she stood at the elevator of Whitmore Development with 2 cups of coffee in a cardboard tray and the manila folder tucked under one arm. By 6:01, she stepped into the executive office, where the city still slept beyond the windows, and the air felt sharper, expectant. Grant was already there, standing behind his desk, scanning documents under the bluish glow of morning. He looked up, surprised, but only slightly. Emily walked in, set 1 cup on his desk without a word, and kept the other. Then, softly, with a calm she hadn't felt in years, she said, Let's begin. Mr. Whitmore. She wasn't just a woman with a notepad. She was a woman with a plan. And for the first time in a very long while, someone was about to see it. Emily sat across from Grant Whitmore at the long oak table in the executive conference room, the same one where just days earlier she'd poured coffee on a contract and shattered the quiet hierarchy of an office built on silent obedience. But today, there was no coffee, no dramatic tension, only 2 people, 2 minds, and a whiteboard waiting to be filled. Grant had started the day cool and skeptical. He slid a thick stack of files across the table to her just after 6 a.m. sharp, his expression unreadable. Let's see what you've got. Emily didn't flinch. The files detailed Whitmore Development's upcoming joint venture with a Boston-based investment group money that could fund a waterfront property on the east side. But the investment team had concerns unclear, permitting timelines, shaky public support, and resistance from a local community board. She had anticipated all of it. "I started looking into their risk matrix," Emily said, flipping open her own folder. "They're heavily influenced by local policy perception. If we can show we're aligned with the neighborhood, we de-risk the whole deal." Grant leaned forward, eyebrow raised. "And how do you know what influences their matrix?" "I called their former project manager in Hartford," she said simply. "Posed as a student writing a research paper on urban development trends. We talked for 22 minutes. He blinked. Emily smiled, just a little. Over the next 2 hours, they went line by line through the strategy. She outlined the core issues: public concern over traffic, environmental impact on harbor wildlife, lack of transparency around local jobs. She had data. She had proposals. She had drafted a community engagement plan that was more detailed than anything on file. Grant started questioning her, not to undermine, but to test. "What about zoning overlays?" I cross-checked with the July updates, page 6 of my packet. "And if the board asks for minority-owned subcontractors, I already contacted 3 pre-certified firms in Dorchester. They meet the bid requirements." She met every challenge with a calm answer and steady eye. No fluster, no fumbling. By the 3rd hour, he wasn't interrupting her anymore. He was listening, and somewhere between the legal jargon and the housing density forecasts, something in the air shifted. They weren't boss and assistant now. They were 2 professionals with different skill sets, sharpening each other like blades at the whetstone. He paced. She drew diagrams. He argued. She countered. He challenged. And she pushed right back, not with attitude, but with earned authority. At one point, Grant paused in front of the whiteboard, hands on hips. "You do realize," he said, turning toward her, "you just built an entire mitigation strategy in under 3 hours." "I've been building it for months," Emily replied, her voice quiet but firm. "You just never asked." The words hung in the room longer than either of them expected. He looked at her for a long time, not appraising, not analyzing, just seeing. It was the first time she felt it being looked at as an equal. Later that afternoon, Grant had a call scheduled with the investment group. It was supposed to be a simple check-in, but after reviewing Emily's updated strategy, he changed course. "You're leading this part," he told her as they walked into the smaller boardroom. "Explain your plan." Emily hesitated. "To them, the partners. You've earned it," he said. "Now own it." Her stomach fluttered, but her steps didn't falter. During the call, she spoke clearly and precisely. She walked them through her revised timeline, community outreach proposals, and contractor rotation strategy. One of the partners interrupted with a skeptical tone. "We've heard this kind of proposal before, Miss Parker. Most of them fall flat after the press release." Emily nodded once. "That's fair. But this one won't. We're not just saying the right things, we're already doing them. I've had 2 preliminary conversations with leaders from the East Side Neighborhood Alliance. They're cautious, but interested, especially if we guarantee hiring priority for local tradespeople." There was a pause. Then another voice came through. "That's a strong position. Can you put that in writing?" "I already have," she said. "It's in the folder Grant emailed 20 minutes ago." Grant, who had been silent, glanced at her. One brow lifted in something that almost resembled pride. The call ended with a verbal green light and a promise to meet again next week. After the room was empty, Grant leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. "Well," he said, "that was impressive." Emily smiled, the adrenaline still warm in her chest. "I told you I could do more than refill coffee." "You did," he admitted, "but I didn't think you meant this much more." He stood, gathering the papers. "There's a national development conference tomorrow, Philadelphia. I want you there." Emily blinked. "Me? You'll be in the meetings, not as a secretary, as my strategic advisor." She stared at him for a second too long. Then, cautiously, she asked, "Are you sure?" He met her eyes. I'd be an idiot not to. Success makes noise, and some people only know how to whisper and poison. It began with the glances, subtle at first, the way conversations fell silent when Emily walked into the room. How colleagues she'd known for 3 years, some of whom had never bothered to learn her last name, suddenly seemed hyper-aware of her every step. She had expected some attention after Philadelphia. After all, she'd walked into a national development conference as Grant Whitmore's right hand, spoken confidently on 2 panels, and helped close a handshake agreement worth $30 million in investment. What she hadn't expected was the venom. By Tuesday morning, the shift in atmosphere was unmistakable. Emily stepped out of the elevator on the 12th floor and immediately sensed it. The quiet tension, like perfume that had turned sour. The looks that weren't curious anymore. They were sharp, measuring, mean. She passed by the kitchen where 2 junior associates whispered over their mugs. One glanced up, saw her, and nudged the other. "Guess refilling coffee leads to bigger perks than we thought," the woman muttered. Not quietly enough. Emily's steps faltered, but she didn't stop. She never stopped. Not when she was teaching middle schoolers who'd lost their homes in the 2008 crash. Not when she was signing the death certificate for her husband. Not when she'd had to explain to Jake why she couldn't be at his school play because of a last-minute board report. But this was a different kind of cruelty. The kind that smiled at you in meetings and tore you apart over lunch. By midday, the whispers had grown legs. An anonymous comment appeared on the company's internal discussion board. Must be nice to rise through the ranks without the resume to match. Wonder what she did to catch Whitmore's attention. Then came a meme someone had circulated in Slack, an image of a spilled coffee cup with the caption, "Promotion. The Emily Parker way." Grant didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't acknowledge it. He was too focused on preparing for the European expansion meetings, too deep in zoning charts and market trends to see the bruise forming around her spirit. But Lauren noticed, she always noticed. During the afternoon meeting, while Emily was presenting her revised compliance timeline, Lauren interrupted with a dry cough and a smirk. "Sorry," she said, eyes dancing. "It's just incredible how fast some people can learn the job. Almost like they've had private tutoring." The room chuckled. Emily felt heat crawl up her neck. She looked to Grant, but he was scanning his notes. Face unreadable. No defense, no rebuttal, just silence. After the meeting, Emily returned to her desk. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her planner. She didn't cry. Not in front of them, not here. But her breath hitched when she saw the headline in her inbox. "Power Play at Whitmore Development Sources. Say CEO's new advisor is more than just business." The article had been posted by a gossip blog notorious for corporate takedowns. It cited unnamed sources, speculated about late-night meetings, hotel bookings during the conference, and used the word inappropriate 5 times in 2 paragraphs. There was even a photo of her and Grant stepping out of the hotel lobby, him holding the door, her carrying her briefcase. Completely innocuous and entirely damning in the eyes of those already eager to believe the worst. She closed the browser, sat back, stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then, without a word, she stood up and walked to the restroom at the far end of the hall, the one no one used after 2 p.m. It was quiet there, always had been. Emily entered the last stall, locked the door, and sat on the closed lid. The echo of voices real and imagined rang in her ears. Lucky girl. She's playing the game. Just a pretty face with perfect timing. She pressed her palms to her eyes until stars bloomed in the dark. She didn't cry, but her chest ached like grief. Because that's what it was, in a way. Grief for the work no one would see. For the late nights and studied regulations. For the mind that was always 2 steps ahead, but now seen only through the curve of a rumor. After a while, she stood and walked to the sink, turned on the faucet, let the water run over her fingers. She looked up. The mirror was harsh in its honesty. There she was, hair pulled back neatly, lipstick faded, blouse still crisp. She looked like a woman who had it together, like someone who had earned her place. But beneath it, she could feel the unraveling, the question she couldn't push away. Maybe they'll never see the work, only the woman. The higher you climb, the more people try to pull you down. Emily Parker had always known how to make herself small, quiet, polite, unthreatening. It was a survival skill, one she had honed through years of being underestimated, of walking into rooms where her voice wasn't expected or welcomed. But after a week standing beside Grant Whitmore in boardrooms and conference halls, she had started to believe that maybe her voice had finally found space to breathe. Then came the whispers, the article, the looks that sliced instead of glanced. And just like that, she was shrinking again. She came in early and left late, just like before. She sat through meetings without a word unless spoken to. She kept her shoulders slightly curved, as if even her posture might offend someone now. When she passed through hallways, she moved like a shadow present, but never acknowledged. Grant noticed. She felt it in the way his eyes lingered a little too long, in the unfinished sentences, in the coffees he now fetched himself without asking. But he didn't ask questions, and she didn't offer answers. It was easier to return to the silence than explain how noise could wound. That Thursday morning, the boardroom felt colder than usual. Emily sat near the far end, just a few seats from the wall of windows overlooking the city skyline. The sunlight poured in, bright, unfeeling, as if unaware of the tension thickening in the room. 12 board members, 11 men. One woman with decades of power etched into every crease of her suit. They all looked at Grant with polite curiosity, their expressions masks of interest. Emily's laptop sat open, fingers poised. She was here only to take minutes. That's what she told herself. That's what she clung to. Grant stood at the head of the table, impeccable as always. He delivered the European strategy with composure, his voice even, his tone firm. The man knew how to command a room, always had, until Mr. Richard Reed cleared his throat. Emily didn't flinch, but her pulse quickened. Before we move on to final approvals, Reed began, I believe there's a personnel matter worth addressing. Grant's face didn't change, but Emily saw the stillness settle across his shoulders like a coat. Reed smiled thinly. I've received a few calls, concerned shareholders, questions about the structure of your inner advisory team, particularly regarding Miss Parker's recent promotion. A few heads turned. Emily kept her eyes on her screen. The cursor blinked steadily. Waiting. Of course, Reed continued. We value innovation and unconventional thinking, but given recent press attention and the optics, we feel it's only appropriate to clarify how and why certain roles have shifted. Silence. Not one person came to her defense. Not one colleague reminded the room that Emily had saved a major investment deal just days ago, that she had rewritten the integration strategy overnight, that she had outperformed 2 senior VPs with degrees from Wharton. All they saw now was the rumor, the woman, the implication. Grant's hands rested lightly on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than usual, but no less steady. This meeting is about strategic expansion, he said. If anyone has concerns about personnel, I'll address them privately. One-on-one. That's not transparency, Reed replied smoothly. That's boundaries, Grant said, his eyes flat. And you'd do well to respect them. The rest of the meeting crawled by in a blur. Slides, votes, motions passed. Emily typed, but barely remembered what she was recording. When the room finally emptied, she left quickly. No words, no eye contact, just the quiet click of heels on polished wood. That evening, the building was still, the floor half lit, the glass reflecting a city slowly exhaling into dusk. Emily sat at her desk, a manila envelope resting on her lap. Her resignation letter was inside, 1 page, typed, no drama, no emotion, just the facts, gratitude, a note of appreciation, and a clean break. She had written it that afternoon between glances at the news, between whispers that still echoed through cubicles. She stood and walked to Grant's office. The door was cracked open. He was at his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled, tie loose. He looked tired, not physically, but in the way that settled into your bones after years of carrying more than anyone knew. Emily knocked softly, then stepped in. "I need to say something," she said. He looked up. "I'm resigning," she continued, walking forward and placing the envelope on the edge of his desk. "Effective tomorrow." His gaze flicked from her to the envelope and back again. "I know you didn't ask me to, but it's the only way this ends without damage. To you, to the company, the noise. It's too loud." Still, he didn't touch the envelope. "You've done nothing wrong," he said. "That doesn't matter," she whispered. "Perception does." He stood slowly, walking around the desk until he stood a few feet away. "You think stepping down is noble," he said, "but it won't change what they believe. You disappearing just confirms the story." "Then what should I do?" she asked, her voice finally cracking. "Stay and watch everything I worked for become gossip. Watch you lose your credibility over a rumor." There was a pause, a long one. Then Grant looked at her. Not like a CEO, not like a man protecting an empire, but like someone deciding whether to hand over a piece of his own past. "There's something you don't know," he said quietly. Emily held his gaze, waiting. What she asked. He drew in a breath, one that sounded heavier than it should have. "A long time ago," he said, "someone I admired had her career destroyed by whispers just like these. And I swore, if I ever had power, I'd never let that happen again." Before there was Emily Parker, there was Margaret Whitmore. The envelope still sat on Grant's desk unopened, untouched. Emily hadn't taken it back, but she hadn't forced it on him either. She wasn't sure what this moment was. A pause between endings, or the fragile beginning of something else. Grant stood by the window, arms crossed, looking not at the city lights, but at something far away, something no skyline could hold. "My mother's name was Margaret," he said quietly, almost to himself. Emily stayed silent. His voice, usually sharp and measured like the tick of a well-made watch, had softened, hesitated. "She was my father's secretary," he continued, still not facing her. Not a glamorous title, but she wore it like it meant something. And it did. She was organized, brilliant, the glue in a chaotic office full of fragile egos and bigger wallets. Emily's fingers curled gently around the edge of her chair. She could feel where this story was going. Not the details, but the weight. She wasn't flashy. She didn't climb the ladder. She held it steady for everyone else. People like her don't usually get noticed, unless someone wants to tear them down. He let out a slow breath, then turned around. "When I was 12, I went to the office with her one summer morning. I was excited to see where she worked. I thought I'd get to spin in a leather chair or answer phones like in the movies. Instead, I heard her crying. In the restroom, alone." Emily swallowed hard. She didn't look away. "They thought she was having an affair with my father," he said, bitterness creeping into his voice. "Because she worked late. Because she knew too much. Because, in their eyes, a woman like her couldn't just be capable, she had to be climbing over someone to get there." The room felt still, heavy with the unspoken. She lost her job quietly. No scandal, no lawsuits, just a polite resignation and a thin severance check. "My dad thought it was the best way to protect the company and her." Emily's throat tightened. She didn't ask what happened next. She didn't have to. She got sick about a year later, Grant said. Breast cancer. We didn't catch it early. She'd skipped appointments to save money. Didn't want to burden anyone. She said she'd get around to it. But she never did. He looked down at his hands, as if they still carried the weight of those lost days. "She died 6 months later," he said simply. "And I made a promise at her funeral. I told myself, if I ever had power, I would never let another woman be erased by rumor. I would never stand by while the world twisted competence into scandal. His eyes met hers now, clear, unflinching, but I did. He said, "With you." Emily didn't move. Her breath came quiet and steady, but her chest ached with the familiar sting of being unseen, misread, misjudged. "You didn't start the whispers," she said softly. "No," he agreed, "but I didn't fight them either. I didn't shut them down. I let them grow in the corners. I let fear keep me silent, and that's the same mistake my father made." He stepped forward now, slow but sure. "I owe you more than an apology. Emily, I owe you truth, and respect, and maybe something I haven't been brave enough to give anyone in a long time trust." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the low hum of the building's heating system and the distant horns of the evening traffic below. Emily thought of her own promises, the ones whispered in the dark after John died, after she tucked Jake in alone, after interviews where her resume impressed, but her story didn't fit the mold. She stepped closer, close enough to see the creases near his eyes that didn't come from spreadsheets or strategy, close enough to feel the gravity of two people who had both lost something vital and had been building armor ever since. "I'm not Margaret," she said. "I know," he replied, "but I'm also not afraid to become her, if it means standing up for myself." Grant nodded slowly, as if he understood the cost of what that meant. "I don't want you to be her," he said. "I want you to stay, and not in the shadows, not in the hallway, waiting for someone to give you permission to matter." Emily looked down at the envelope still resting on his desk. "You don't want me to leave? I never did," he said. "I just didn't know how to ask you to stay, without making it worse." Then, quietly, Emily reached out and placed her hand gently over his. It was the first time, not as an assistant passing files, not as a subordinate waiting for approval, but as a woman choosing presence over permission. His hand didn't pull away. She let her fingers linger a moment longer, then whispered, "We don't have to repeat their story." His voice, low and raw, answered, "No, we don't." Outside, the sky faded from gray to navy. The city pulsed with motion, unaware of the stillness inside this glass tower. Inside, two people stood, finally facing more than just each other. They were facing the ghosts of what had been and beginning to shape what might come next. She walked into the same office, but she was no longer the same woman. The floor still gleamed with that same polished sheen. The elevator still opened with its familiar chime, and the walls of Whitmore Development still carried the same sterile, corporate hush. But to Emily Parker, everything felt different, because she was different. She no longer walked with her shoulders tight and gaze lowered. She didn't shrink herself into corners or melt into invisibility. No longer just a background fixture. Today, she walked in as the new director of strategic partnerships, an official title Grant had insisted upon, though Emily had hesitated before accepting. Titles had always felt like window dressing to her, but sometimes a nameplate wasn't just decoration, it was armor, and for the first time, she needed one. Her desk had moved, not to a bigger office, not behind a locked door. Instead, Grant had done something no one expected. He'd removed the private office suite reserved for executive assistants altogether. That glass cage where she had once lived in silence had been replaced with an open collaborative space designed by Emily herself. It was symbolic and practical, but mostly, it was bold, I figured, Grant had said dryly when she first saw the change. If you were going to keep changing how we think, we might as well change how we sit. Now, as she made her way past familiar faces in unfamiliar ways, the stares came not with doubt, but with a curiosity she could finally meet head on. Still, Emily knew this was only the beginning. Earning a title was easy. Living up to it every single day, that was where the real work began. Her morning started early, as it always had. Only this time, she wasn't preparing someone else's meeting. She was running her own, the 8 Rue all. Strategy session included directors from 3 departments and a team of consultants from Zurich. The discussion moved quickly from zoning regulations to investment rounds to cultural alignment strategies. Emily led with clarity, asked the tough questions, and didn't hesitate to challenge anyone's assumptions, including her own. When the meeting ended, no one looked surprised, they looked impressed. That afternoon, she sat down with Grant to finalize the overhaul of several internal workflows, starting with the most symbolic of them all, how new ideas were submitted and evaluated. No more gatekeeping through assistance, she said firmly. If we want innovation, it needs to be bottom up. Grant had nodded, listening carefully, the way he always did now. Done, he replied. As the day wore on, Emily barely noticed how many people now stopped her in the hallway, not to whisper, but to ask questions, to get her input, to thank her. It felt surreal. She had once wondered if anyone would ever see the real her. Now they did. But the true test wasn't in whispered respect. It was on a stage, under bright lights. That evening, Emily found herself backstage at the annual East Coast Development Forum, held in the grand ballroom of the Philadelphia Convention Center. The room pulsed with quiet tension, tables lined with investors, city planners, policymakers, and reporters from major outlets. A sea of suits, eyes, and expectations. Whitmore Development had a coveted slot to present their sustainable urban expansion model, an initiative Emily had spent months refining. Grant was supposed to present, but he'd changed the script. "You're leading," he told her 2 days prior. "I've never presented at this scale." She replied, "You've earned this stage," he said, "and if they don't see it yet, they will. Now." Standing behind the curtain, microphone clipped to her blazer, Emily could feel the familiar flutter of nerves. But she also felt something else beneath them, a grounded sense of purpose, a quiet fire. The lights came up, her name was announced, and then she walked out. The first few seconds were always the hardest, but once she reached the podium and saw the sea of eyes looking not through her, but at her, something clicked into place. She spoke with calm confidence. She told stories about real neighborhoods, real people. She outlined policy challenges with clarity, proposed solutions rooted in equity and long-term planning. She didn't lean on technical jargon to sound impressive. She used it only when necessary, always circling back to impact. When the final slide faded behind her and she opened the floor for questions, the first came from a reporter from the Boston Globe. "Ms. Parker," she said, "your presentation emphasized community-first growth, but real estate is a profit-driven industry. Do you really believe your model is sustainable?" Emily smiled, not condescendingly, but warmly. "I believe the only kind of growth that lasts," she replied, "is the kind that includes the people living inside the buildings we construct. A beat, then applause, not polite, genuine." When she stepped down from the stage, her legs felt like air, but her chest, her spine, her voice had never felt more solid. Behind the curtain, she found Grant waiting. He didn't clap. He didn't say good job or offer some empty corporate compliment. He just looked at her steady, proud, and then, softly, he said, "9 days left, and I'm just getting started." Emily chuckled, breathless. "So am I. Sometimes, one bold move doesn't end a story. It starts a new one." The offer came in a sealed envelope, but Emily already knew what it would say. Grant had been distant all morning, not cold, not withdrawn, just quieter, thoughtful. The kind of quiet that meant something was about to change. He hadn't said a word when he slid the envelope across her desk. Just a small nod, as if to say, "You've earned it." Inside was a formal letter from the board of Whitmore Development. They were offering her the role of Vice President of Strategic Growth, a corner office, a 7-figure salary, a team of her own, and a press release already drafted. Emily stared at the words. The ink didn't smudge. The title was real, but her fingers didn't curl around it like she thought they might. Instead, she laid the letter gently on the table, leaned back in her chair, and looked out the window. The city spread before her like a promise she wasn't sure she needed anymore. That afternoon, Grant found her by the roof garden. He approached without his usual armor, no phone in hand, no sharp words ready, just him, quiet again. "I expected more excitement," he said softly. Emily smiled. "You expected me to say yes. Didn't expect, hoped." She turned toward him. "It's not that I'm not grateful. I know," he said. "You earned it, every piece of it. That's not why I gave it to you." "No," she agreed. "It's why you offered it." There was a long pause. Then she added, "But I think I already know what my next chapter looks like. And it's not in a corner office." Grant didn't flinch. She continued, "Do you remember the first day I started working here, I wore a navy blue blazer that was a size too big. I thought it would make me look more competent, more invisible." "I remember," he said quietly. "You didn't look at me that day. Not really. No one did. For 3 years, I was furniture, a calendar on legs." He winced, but didn't deny it. Emily's gaze softened. "And then I poured coffee on your favorite contract. And suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore." They both laughed, just a little. She took a breath. "The truth is, I didn't fight to be seen just to climb another corporate ladder. I fought to be heard." He nodded slowly. "So, what are you going to do?" he asked, though the answer was already in her eyes. "I'm going home," she said, "to Vermont." Grant's brow lifted slightly. "To your son?" She smiled. "To my son, yes, but also to my roots." He waited. "I want to start a program," she explained, "for women, especially those who've been overlooked, widows, single moms, women who've lost their place in the world and don't know where to begin again." His silence said more than words could. "I want to teach them financial literacy," she said. "Real-world skills, budgeting, investing, negotiation, everything I had to learn alone. I want to give them what no one gave me." Grant exhaled. "That's bold." "It's not bold," Emily replied, her voice steady. "It's necessary." He stepped closer now, not in authority, but in respect. "Do you need help?" He asked. "I need funding. I need space. I need someone to believe it matters." "You have all three," he said. Their eyes held, not with romance, but with recognition. Two people, no longer trapped in roles, no longer hiding behind expectations or titles. She turned to leave, then paused. "You never asked me to coffee," she teased. "I figured I'd save it for after the promotion." She smiled. "Well, I'm free now." Grant reached into his coat pocket and pulled out 2 paper cups. "Then, let's start here," he said, handing her one. "No meetings, no strategies, just 2 people who don't want to repeat old stories." They sat on a bench overlooking the city, not a CEO and assistant, or even partners in business. Just Emily and Grant, 2 people with hard-earned clarity and a cup of decent coffee between them. Months later, a small building reopened in the heart of a quiet Vermont town. It had once been a closed-down post office. Now, it was something else entirely. A sign over the door read, "The Margaret Center, Financial Education for Women Who Start Over." Inside, Emily stood before her first class, a dozen women of all ages, each with different stories. Some had tears in their eyes. Some had fire. All had been told, at some point in their lives, that they were too late, too small, too something. Emily looked around the room, heart full. "This isn't about getting rich," she began. "It's about getting free. It's about not asking for permission to know things, to build things, to matter." Behind her on the chalkboard, she had written a single sentence. "You're not just a secretary, or a widow, or a background character. You're the author now." That night, after class, she stepped outside into the cool Vermont air, a sweater around her shoulders and a smile playing at the edges of her lips. She checked her phone. One new message from Grant. "How was day 1, Miss Parker?" She typed back, "It wasn't just about leaving a job. It was about finding my voice and using it." Then she slipped the phone back into her pocket, walked to her car, and drove home where her son was waiting. and her new life had just begun. Sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that have been silent the longest. Emily's journey reminds us that being overlooked doesn't mean being incapable. In a world that often values titles over talent and noise over wisdom, her story is a quiet testament to patience, strength, and the quiet dignity of showing up day after day, even when no one's watching. She didn't fight for attention, she fought for respect. And perhaps that's something we all long for, not to be praised loudly, but to be seen truthfully. The lesson here is simple but profound. Your worth isn't defined by your job title, your past, or by what others fail to see in you. It's defined by your integrity, your persistence, and the courage to speak up when it matters most. No matter your age, it is never too late to reclaim your voice. Whether you're in a boardroom, a classroom, or sitting quietly at home, your story still matters. And your next chapter can still surprise you. So, stand tall, speak gently, and never forget that one bold move can begin the life you were always meant to live. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it touched your heart or reminded you of your own quiet strength, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone who might need it, and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt stories to life, stories that heal, inspire, and remind us we're never alone. We're so glad you're here.